Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt like you were staring at a stranger wearing a familiar face? That moment when you realize the person you trusted might not be who you thought they were. It's a peculiar kind of loneliness, isn't it? Like discovering that the house you've lived in your whole life was built on sand. Most of us spend our lives reading people the way we read books. We look at the cover, we trust the synopsis, and we assume the story inside matches the binding. But what if I told you that the real chapters, the ones that truly reveal who someone is, are written in places you've never learned to look? Today we're diving into something that might fundamentally change how you see the people around you. We're talking about the hidden signatures of authentic character. The small, almost invisible tells that reveal whether someone is genuinely trustworthy or masterfully performing trustworthiness. Because here's the thing nobody wants to admit: the best liars don't lie with their words. They lie with their consistency. They've learned to make the mask fit so perfectly that even they sometimes forget they're wearing one. So let's start with something uncomfortable. Think about the last time someone disappointed you. Not because they failed you once, but because you suddenly realized they'd been failing you all along, and you just hadn't been paying attention. What did you miss? What small crack in the facade could have warned you? The psychology of authentic character is fascinating because it operates on a principle that most of us get backwards. We think character is what people show us when they're trying to impress us. We think it's the carefully curated version they present on their best days. But psychologist Carl Jung pointed to something far more revealing. He said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What Jung was really describing is this: your true character isn't your resume. It's not your intentions. It's not even your values as you understand them. Your true character is the invisible architecture underneath. It's the deeply ingrained patterns that show up when you're tired, when nobody's watching, when the stakes are just high enough to matter but low enough that you think your response won't count. Think about this. Someone can be honest with you about big things and lie through omission about small ones. Someone can speak truthfully in words while being completely dishonest through their actions. We call this integrity, but what is integrity really? It's not wholeness. It's not perfection. Integrity comes from the word integer, which means whole. It means there's consistency between the different versions of you that exist in different rooms. The you with your parents, the you with your colleagues, the you when you're alone. Here's the first hidden sign of authentic character that most people completely miss: what someone does when they think nobody important is watching. I'm not talking about moral failings. I'm talking about something subtler. It's how someone treats a waiter who makes a mistake. It's whether they acknowledge a small kindness or let it pass as if the universe owed it to them. It's whether they correct someone publicly who made an error or do it privately to preserve dignity. These aren't grand moral tests. These are the cracks in the sidewalk that most of us step over without noticing. There's a psychological phenomenon called the fundamental attribution error. We tend to judge others by their actions and ourselves by our circumstances. So when someone is rude to a service worker, we think they're a rude person. When we're rude to a service worker, we think we're having a bad day. But people with authentic character have inverted this. They judge themselves more harshly than anyone else would. They see their circumstances and their mood and they still choose dignity. Watch someone when they're frustrated. Not angry, not in crisis. Just that low simmer of frustration when things aren't going their way and they think the inconvenience is beneath their patience. Do they snap? Do they make someone else bear the weight of their irritation? Or do they pause, acknowledge the frustration internally, and treat the person in front of them as if they matter? This brings us to the second signature of genuine character: the ability to feel one thing and do another. This might sound obvious, but it's revolutionary. Most people's entire theory of self-control is based on suppression. They try not to feel angry, they try not to feel irritated, and when that fails, they blame the situation. Real character isn't about not feeling. It's about the gap between feeling and action. And that gap is where choice lives. Psychologist Dan Siegel talks about something called the window of tolerance. It's the zone where we can respond consciously instead of react automatically. People with authentic character have worked, often unconsciously, to widen that window. They've expanded the distance between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote something that captures this perfectly. He said that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So here's what you're actually looking for. Not someone who never gets angry or frustrated. Look for someone who gets angry and then does the right thing anyway. Look for someone who's disappointed and still shows up with integrity. Look for someone whose character operates independently of their emotional state. This is visible everywhere if you know where to look. It's in how someone handles being wrong. Some people, when corrected, will defend their position. They'll find reasons why they were actually right, or at least why it wasn't their fault. These are people whose sense of self is fragile. It depends on always being perceived as competent or right. But people with robust character, with real integrity, have something different happening internally. Their sense of self isn't built on the foundation of being right. It's built on something more solid. So when they're wrong, they can actually see it. And more than that, they can say it. They can say, "I didn't know that. I handled that poorly. I'm going to do better." There's no performance. There's no defensiveness. There's just a person who values truth more than ego. Now let's talk about something that might be the most important sign of all, and almost nobody looks for it. How someone behaves when they have power over you. This is where character either proves itself or crumbles. Any of us can be kind and patient when we're equals. But what happens when the dynamics shift? When someone has authority, when they could use you or discard you and face no consequences? What do? Psychologists have studied this extensively, and the results are sobering. Most people become less conscientious with people they perceive as having lower status. They're shorter with them. They're less patient. They assume the worst. But people with true character do something different. They often become more gentle, not out of obligation or fear of judgment, but because they understand something fundamental about power. They understand that having power over someone is actually a responsibility, not a privilege. It's a small opening where you can either build someone up or diminish them, and people with character are conscious of that weight. Think about someone you know who holds some position of authority, a boss, a teacher, a parent. Watch how they treat someone who can't retaliate, who can't hurt their career or status, who's completely dependent on their goodwill. Do they use that power gently? Do they preserve dignity even when correction is necessary? Or do they use it to confirm their superiority? This is the third major signature of authentic character: generosity with power. It sounds poetic, but it's deeply practical. Someone who is genuinely trustworthy doesn't need to prove their worth by leveraging what they have over others. Their character is internal enough that they don't require constant external validation through dominance. Now here's where it gets interesting, because we have to talk about the things that look like character but aren't. This is where people get fooled. Authenticity isn't confidence. Confidence is just certainty in your own competence. You can be a confident liar. You can be a confident manipulator. Authenticity is something completely different. It's alignment between who you are, what you say, and what you do, especially when nobody's keeping score. Some of the most charming, articulate, seemingly integrated people are actually just skilled performers. They've developed emotional intelligence not to understand themselves better, but to understand how to move other people. They know what to say. They know how to make you feel seen. They know how to create the illusion of connection. And here's what's insidious: these skills aren't inherently wrong. They're not bad. But when they're used without the ground of real self-awareness, they become tools of manipulation. So how do you tell the difference? Here's something that psychologist Brené Brown has pointed out repeatedly. People with genuine character can be vulnerable, not weak, not helpless, but genuinely vulnerable, capable of saying, I don't know, I made a mistake, I'm struggling, I need help. People who are just performing authenticity can't quite manage this. They can confess to strategic weaknesses. They can present themselves as flawed in ways that are ultimately endearing or relatable. But real vulnerability means you could lose something. You could lose respect. You could lose status. And they're willing to risk that because integrity matters more than image. This is the fourth sign, the willingness to be genuinely vulnerable. Watch someone when they're caught in a moment where they could either maintain image or be honest. Which do they choose? And I don't mean big moments. I mean the small daily choices. Someone asks how you're doing and you're not doing well. Do you say that? Or do you perform fine? Someone knows you had a failure. Do you acknowledge it with them? Or do you rewrite the story so that you come out looking better? These small choices compound. They shape not just how others see you, but who you're becoming. Here's something most psychology talks around but doesn't say directly. Character is performative. I don't mean fake. I mean that who you are is partly determined by who you consistently practice being. Every time you choose honesty over comfort, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways toward authenticity. Every time you choose appearance over integrity, you're wiring yourself toward performance. This comes from the psychological concept of implementation intentions. It's the idea that your behavior doesn't just come from your beliefs. Your behavior actually shapes your beliefs. So if you want to know who someone really is, don't ask them what they believe. Watch what they repeatedly do. Because repeated behavior is becoming identity. This is why people with authentic character often seem to improve over time. It's not that they suddenly became more enlightened. It's that they've been practicing integrity so consistently that it's no longer effortful. It's just who they are. Now let's talk about one of the most overlooked signs, how someone handles other people's vulnerabilities. There's a kind of cruelty that's socially acceptable. It's the cruelty of people who treat others' pain as entertainment, who laugh at someone's misfortune, who share secrets told in confidence, who use people's weaknesses as leverage in arguments. People with authentic character do something radically different. They treat other people's vulnerability as sacred, not because they're being virtuous or performing kindness, but because they understand something fundamental. Vulnerability is courage. When someone shares something they're struggling with, something they're ashamed of, something they fear, they're offering you something precious. They're offering you access to their real self. And people with character understand that this access is a privilege. It's something to protect, not exploit. So they become trustworthy not because they're being watched, but because they've internalized that trustworthiness is a responsibility. There's a term that psychologists use, psychological safety. It's the idea that in a group or relationship, people feel safe being themselves. And it's interesting because psychological safety isn't created by nice people. It's created by people who are genuinely trustworthy, by people who have proven repeatedly that vulnerability here is safe, that mistakes will be acknowledged and learned from, not used as ammunition, that who you are is valued more than your performance. This is the fifth sign of authentic character, the creation of safety for others. Now, I want to pause here because something important happens when we talk about character like this. We start feeling like we need to grade ourselves. We start asking, am I authentic? Do I have character? And here's where honesty matters. Nobody is perfectly integrated. Nobody is consistently authentic. We all wear masks sometimes. We all choose appearance over integrity sometimes. We all fail to show up with our full selves in relationships. The question isn't whether you're perfect. The question is whether you're trying, whether you're conscious of the gaps between your ideal self and your actual self, whether you're willing to close those gaps slowly, imperfectly, over time. Carl Jung talked about this in terms of the shadow. He said that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it's embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. What he meant is that the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the parts we repress or deny, those parts don't disappear. They gain power. They operate unconsciously. They leak out in ways we don't intend and can't control. Real character building starts with integration, with looking at the parts of yourself you don't like, that you're ashamed of, that don't fit your self-image. And instead of pushing them away, you acknowledge them. You understand where they come from. You compassionately integrate them into your sense of self. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means understanding yourself clearly enough that you can choose, consciously, what you're going to do with those impulses. And people who have done this work, who have integrated their shadow instead of being controlled by it, those are the people who seem stable, centered, trustworthy in ways that feel inexplicable until you understand what's actually happening underneath. So here's something to practice. In your own life, look for these gaps. Where are you saying one thing and doing another? Where are you performing a version of yourself that isn't quite honest? Not to shame yourself, but to bring awareness. Because awareness is where change begins. And then here's the beautiful part. As you start closing these gaps, as you start choosing integrity in small moments, something shifts. People respond differently to you. Not because you're suddenly performing better, but because you're no longer spending energy on the performance. That energy goes somewhere else. It goes into genuine connection, into presence, into the kind of relationship that actually nourishes both people. Let me give you some practical frameworks for seeing character more clearly. These are things you can observe, starting today. First, there's what we might call the consistency principle. Character shows up in patterns, not isolated incidents. So if you want to assess whether someone is trustworthy, don't look at their best behavior. Look at their average behavior. What do they do when the stakes are low? How do they typically treat people who can't help them? These patterns are more revealing than any single choice. Second, there's what psychologists call incongruence detection. It's the ability to notice when someone's words don't match their actions. And here's what's interesting. Most people are actually quite good at this unconsciously, but then they override their instinct. They think, maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. And they talk themselves out of what their gut is accurately perceiving. Trust that instinct. If someone's words and actions don't match, that's real information. That's character showing itself. Third, there's response to feedback. This is huge. Watch how someone responds when you point out that something they did hurt you or disappointed you. Do they get defensive? Do they explain it away? Do they turn it back on you somehow? Or do they pause, actually listen, and try to understand your perspective? People with character can hear feedback without it being an attack on their identity. Fourth, there's the money test and the power test. How does someone act when money is involved? When they think they can get away with something? When they have leverage over you? These moments reveal something that character presentations can't hide forever. Fifth, there's consistency across contexts. People often behave differently in different environments. They're one way with their family, another way with their boss, another way with their friends. But people with real character, there's a through line. They're the same person in different contexts. Not perfectly the same, but fundamentally the same. The core values are consistent. Now I want to address something that people often get wrong. We tend to think that character is something you either have or don't have. Like it's a trait you're born with. But psychology tells us something different. Character is built through repeated choices. It's built through small moments where you choose integrity over comfort. It's built through consistent practice. This is important because it means character isn't about being special or superior. It's not about being naturally good. It's about the daily decision to align your actions with your values, especially when nobody's watching, especially when it would be easier not to. There's research on something called moral licensing. It shows that people who think of themselves as good people often give themselves permission to act badly in small ways. They think, I'm fundamentally good, so this small dishonesty doesn't matter. I'm trustworthy, so I can cut corners here. But character doesn't work that way. Character is the opposite. The better you become at small acts of integrity, the more you understand that every act matters, that there are no small betrayals. Let me take a step back and ask you something personal. Think about someone you know whom you genuinely trust, not someone who's nice to you, not someone who helps you, someone you actually trust with truth, with vulnerability, with your real self. What did that person do to earn that trust? I'd bet money that it wasn't some grand gesture. It was consistency. It was showing up the same way repeatedly. It was being honest even when dishonesty would have been easier. It was proving through action that who they are and what they say are aligned. That person didn't perform trustworthiness. They practiced integrity so consistently that trustworthiness became inevitable. Now here's where we tie this back to something deeper. When you understand character this way, when you see it as something that's built through repeated practice, you stop being fooled by performance. You stop being swayed by charm or competence alone. You start looking for the real signatures, the invisible architecture, and something shifts in how you move through relationships. You become less naive, yes, but not cynical. You become more discerning. You understand that character isn't about being perfect. It's about being aligned. It's about the integrity of integration. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi did research on what he called flow states, those moments where you're completely absorbed in something and time disappears. And he found something interesting. Flow states happen more frequently around people with authentic character. Why? Because when you're with someone who's genuinely integrated, you don't have to spend energy managing the social dynamics. You don't have to wonder what they really think. You don't have to perform. You can just be. And in that space, actual connection becomes possible. This is what we're really seeking, isn't it? Not just trustworthy people, though that matters, but people who create the conditions for us to be fully ourselves. People whose character is secure enough that they don't need us to be a particular way. They can accept our vulnerability. They can handle our flaws. They can see our shadow and not be threatened by it. And here's the reciprocal truth. If you build character like this, if you practice integrity, if you integrate your own shadow, you become that person for others. You create safety. You make it possible for people around you to be real. That's not a small thing. That's the foundation of real community, real family, real love. Let me give you one more framework because this is where it gets practical. There's what we might call the integrity iceberg. Above the waterline is what people see. Your words, your choices that are visible, your reputation. But below the waterline, mostly invisible, is what actually determines who you are. Your internal dialogue, your choices when nobody's watching, your relationship with yourself. People with authentic character, what's below the waterline matches what's above. Their internal world and their external presentation are aligned. This alignment is what creates the sense of trustworthiness that people respond to. And here's the thing. Most of us spend all our energy managing what's above the waterline. We curate our image. We perform our best self. But what if you spent that energy on what's below, on becoming someone who is genuinely integrated, someone whose internal world is honest and aligned with their values? What would change? How would people respond to you? How would you respond to yourself? This is the real work of character building. It's not about becoming impressive. It's about becoming aligned. It's about shrinking the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be until the gap is essentially gone. There's a beautiful piece of writing by Rainer Maria Rilke where he talks about the future entering into us like radiation. He says, "The future is entering into us in this way in order to transform itself in us long before it happens. That what we must do is take that future into ourselves and live it as if we are living it right now." And that's what I want to suggest about character. Your future self, the version of you that's fully integrated, that's genuinely trustworthy, that's aligned from the inside out, that person is already here, trying to be born. Every time you choose integrity over comfort, every time you acknowledge your mistakes, every time you treat someone with dignity even when nobody's watching, You're giving that future self a chance to be born now. Character isn't something you achieve. It's something you practice into being. Now let me ask you directly, because that's how we make this real. Think about one relationship in your life where you know there's misalignment, where you're performing, where you're holding something back. Not because the other person is dangerous, but because you're afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of rejection, afraid of being seen completely. What would it take to close that gap? What would it take to be more genuinely yourself with that person? And here's the harder question. In your relationship with yourself, where are you performing? Where are you not acknowledging your real thoughts and feelings? Where have you accepted a version of yourself that isn't fully true? This is where change starts, not in grand gestures, not in suddenly becoming a better person, but in small moments of honesty, with yourself first, then with others. Because here's what I've learned from studying this and what the research confirms. People feel it when you're real, even if they can't articulate it, even if they don't know why they trust you. On some level, they recognize alignment. They recognize integration. They recognize someone who isn't wasting energy on the performance of being trustworthy because they are trustworthy. That person stands out, not because they're louder or more charismatic, but because they're more whole. There's less noise in their presence, less static, just clear, genuine human connection. And if this resonated with you, if you're recognizing something in yourself that you want to develop, I'd love for you to share this with someone you care about. Someone who might also be interested in understanding character more deeply, in becoming more integrated, in building relationships based on genuine trust rather than performance. Share this with them. Discuss it. Ask them what they think. Because character isn't built in isolation. It's built in relationship. It's built by showing up honestly with other people, again and again, until the honesty becomes who you are. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for considering these ideas seriously. And thank you for the work you're doing, consciously or not, to become more genuinely yourself. That work matters. It matters to you, and it matters to everyone whose life you touch.